Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is shying away from strong filibuster reform. In a tragic interview with Las Vegas PBS, Reid threw his support behind modest filibuster reform, and he stopped short of endorsing the Merkley-Udall plan, which would require a filibustering minority to speak on the floor of the Senate the entire time they wish to obstruct legislation. Under Reid's plan, the minority would still be able to use a silent filibuster to block legislation. But once debate has started, if it starts, then Republicans would have to talk on the floor the entire time they wish to filibuster before a final vote is called. A spokesman for Senator Jeff Merkley said the Reid plan falls short, saying, quote, "This approach does nothing to take on the core problem we face in the Senate, routine obstruction by the secret silent filibuster." Senator Merkley will continue his discussions with Leader Reid and continue pushing for a real talking filibuster in any final package put together, end quote. If Democrats hope to accomplish anything in the Senate these next 2 years and actually be able to present passed legislation to the American people when the midterms come around in 2014, then it's crucial for Harry Reid to take Senator Merkley's advice and pass strong filibuster reform. And finally, Indiana Republicans are taking their cues from Glenn Beck. 2 Indiana state Republicans have introduced legislation to outlaw the implementation of the UN's Agenda 21 initiative, which is a modest, non-binding proposal to encourage nations to support more sustainable environments. But according to Glenn Beck, who is currently promoting a new book titled Agenda 21, this initiative is the UN's attempt to enact one world government and force us all into some sort of dystopia. There's no proof whatsoever to back up Beck's claims, but that hasn't stopped Republican lawmakers in Georgia, Tennessee, and now Indiana from taking action against it. The question we all have to face now is, what happens to our two-party American political system when one party has flown over the cuckoo's nest and is basing their legislative agenda on paranoid conspiracy theories promoted by Glenn Beck? And that's the way it is today, Tuesday, January 15th, 2013. I'm Thom Hartmann on the news. The bad, and the very, very paniverously ugly, brought to you by Eco Wine, the organic wine company at ecowine.com. For more information, 1-888-ECO-WINE. The good, Martha McCollum. Normally in the good, bad, ugly, we go after Fox so-called news and its assortment of talking heads for practicing phony journalism. But this morning, in what may be a first for the network, Fox host Martha McCollum actually asked a Republican a question. And when he refused to answer, she continued to press him and wouldn't let up. Tea Party Congressman Steve King refused to address specific spending cuts that the Republican Party would support in the debt ceiling debate. McCollum also did a great job of showing that Republicans are intent on letting America default on its debt and don't have a plan B to deal with the debt ceiling. The bad, Rush Limpahls. On his show yesterday, El Rushbo was in the middle of a tirade on gun control when he decided to attack liberals and others who support responsible gun safety laws. Speaking about proponents of gun safety laws, which he believes are only liberals, Rush said, quote, "They're good people. They never use a gun to kill kids. They use abortion for that." Good old Rush, making light of gun violence and fueling the war on women's rights all in the same sentence. Looks like he's still trying hard to take back the right-wing media's biggest nut job status from Alex Jones. And the very, very ugly Ann Coulter. The conservative pundit was on Fox so-called news last night. In an interview with Sean Hannity, Coulter talked about her theory behind all the gun violence in America. Take a listen.
As you know, I just got back from England, which they have not bought into this whole diversity enthusiasm, which raises the important point that on the gun crimes, we keep hearing how low they are in Europe, and oh, they're so low when they have no guns. If you compare white populations, we have the same murder rate as Belgium. So perhaps it's not a gun problem, it is a demographic problem, which liberals are the ones are pushing. Let's get more Colin Fergusons and more whoever the guy was who shot up Fort Hood. Why are they coming in to begin with?
You heard that right. In the delusional head of Ann Coulter, guns don't kill people. Non-white people kill people. Coulter has managed to turn gun violence, an issue that affects everyone of every culture, ethnicity, and religion, into a racial attack. And Sean Hannity not calling her on it is very, very ugly. It's astounding that he would let her go off on that. I mean, if anything, what that does is those statistics demonstrate that racism is real, that it has economic consequences, and that those economic consequences translate into violence. How you could say, well, I guess I've ran about that enough. Let's see here. Oops. I think I just pushed a button and bounced somebody. Maybe not. Mark Taylor-Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark. You wanted to talk about your broadcaster in Florida is on the terrorist watch list, really?
Yeah, it's a story I'm covering as a journalist that has really important implications on freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And it's about Shannon McLeish, who's a broadcaster from Daytona Beach, who through the Freedom of Information Act documents found out that she's been placed on the government terrorist watch list. This is the same series of FOA documents that revealed military, private, corporate, and police surveillance, FBI surveillance of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And Chris Hedges actually finally broke this story last week, although I and some other folks have been working on it for a couple weeks. And McLeish is the co-host of a radio program called Air Occupy, and recent guests on the show were included Noam Chomsky. And I've also been a guest on the show as a journalist, and I can tell you that Shannon seems like the average mother of two young children, and she certainly doesn't seem like someone the government should be worried about. So I've been corresponding with Glenn Greenwald and other folks about it, and I think it's really important that we remember that the U.S. is currently listed as 47th in the world in terms of world press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders. And part of the reason we slipped from number 19 was because of arrests of journalists at the Occupy Wall Street protests. So we need to do better than this, Tom, and I'm really worried about the chilling effect that this may have on reporters and editors who may not want to cover controversial issues now because they're afraid they could end up on a government terrorist watch list.
I agree, Mark. Father Coughlin in the United States, had considerable impact. About a third of all Americans, 1 in 3 Americans were listening to him at least once a week. Limbaugh, I would say, he claims credit for helping get Republicans elected. I take that seriously. So,
especially when most of the country is inundated by right-wing religious broadcasting and right-wing talk shows, and there really is so little alternative media for folks to turn to. By the way, thanks for occupying the media with a truly independent voice, because it is rare. And I know as a journalist it's been very difficult getting these kinds of stories out, and that's really frustrating for me. Makes me, not so surprised that folks like Greg Palast and Glenn Greenwald have gone to other media, international media, in order to cover some of these stories, because it's really hard to break through the corporate barrier here.
Well, and not only that, Greg does a lot of work for the BBC, and Glenn has a lot of stuff that's published in the Guardian in the UK. Both those publications have international reach, so there's something to be said for that as well. But good point. Mark, I got to move along. That was your story?
That's it. Okay. So also, the federal grand jury is still happening in Seattle, jailing activists. There are 3 people still in jail, and one of the latest reports is that 2 of them were actually placed in solitary confinement at the Federal Detention Center in SeaTac, and that's because they've been charged with civil contempt for refusing to testify before a grand jury investigating Northwest activists. So that's another story that's really not getting covered anywhere.
Whoa. But so the only charge against them is that they won't rat somebody out?
Yeah, they're not allowed to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights because they're not the subject or target of any criminal charges.
Right. I've always thought that this grand jury hocus-pocus stuff, which has been going on in this country for at least a half a century, is unconstitutional on its face. That's really, really grim news. Mark, thank you for the update and the information. Keep up the great work, okay?
Thanks, Tom. Bye-bye.
Much appreciated.